On a busy and dusty afternoon in Jerusalem, during the Feast of Tabernacles, an unforgettable event took place. Among the bustling crowd and the critical eyes of the religious leaders, a woman was brought forward, accused of adultery. Biblical stories transport us to this moment, where the expectation of condemnation simmered in the hearts of those present. Murmurs echoed through the square as tension mounted, everyone anxiously awaiting Jesus' reaction. The Pharisees, always ready to enforce their strict interpretation of the law, saw the woman as an opportunity to test Jesus. They placed her before him, expecting him to condemn her according to the teachings of Moses. However, Jesus, with his infinite wisdom, did not rush to judge. The anticipation was palpable, the suspense gripping, and the crowd awaited his final word. The Bible records this as one of the most emblematic scenes of divine mercy. While the woman trembled with fear, her shame exposed, the Pharisees stood ready with stones in their hands, prepared to act. The Bible illustrates the severity of the laws of that time, but it also reminds us of the power of forgiveness. The crowd couldn't look away, eagerly anticipating an outcome that seemed inevitable. Then, Jesus did something unexpected, changing the course of that biblical story forever. He bent down and began writing on the ground, temporarily ignoring the question posed to him. This simple yet profound gesture not only halted the impending accusation, but also laid the foundation for one of the most impactful moments in biblical teachings. Jesus' actions symbolized forgiveness, mercy, and a divine understanding that transcends human justice. Thus, the scene in Jerusalem became a living testimony of divine love and compassion. Jesus, with his serene and compassionate demeanor, bent down and began to write on the ground, a gesture that surprised everyone. Instead of immediately responding to the Pharisees, he diverted the crowd's attention, creating a moment of suspense. This seemingly simple act carried deep symbolism. The Bible highlights this scene as a powerful example of how mercy can silence condemnation. The emotional impact of this action was immediate and palpable. The crowd, which had previously clamored for blood, now fell silent, intently watching Jesus' every move. It was as if time had stopped, allowing each person present to reflect on their own failings. Jesus, through his biblical teachings, always emphasized forgiveness and compassion, and in that moment, he practiced what he preached. This gesture by Jesus became an eternal symbol of forgiveness and divine mercy. He demonstrated that even in the face of accusations and judgments, it is possible to act calmly and wisely. In our everyday lives, we can apply this biblical teaching when dealing with conflicts and disagreements. Instead of reacting impulsively, we can pause, reflect, and seek a more compassionate and fair solution. Jesus' action was not merely an act of mercy, but also a demonstration of his divine authority and understanding. He revealed that true justice transcends human laws, embracing mercy and forgiveness. In the first century, Jerusalem was a hotbed of political and religious tensions. Under Roman rule, the Jews yearned for a messianic liberator, someone to lead them to freedom. Within this context, Jewish religious law permeated everyday life, dictating norms of conduct, rituals, and social practices. The biblical narratives from this period are rich with challenges and resistance, reflecting the ongoing struggle for identity and faith. The scribes and Pharisees, key figures in Jewish society, acted as the guardians of the law. Dressed in immaculate clothing and bearing stern expressions, they were viewed as moral and religious authorities. However, their interpretation of the law often leaned towards rigidity and legalism, emphasizing external observance over the spirit of biblical teachings. This tension between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law is a recurring theme in biblical narratives. Jewish religious law was not just a set of rules, but an intrinsic part of the life and identity of the Jewish people. Festivals, rituals, and daily practices were deeply rooted in biblical teachings. Amid this scenario, Jesus emerged as a figure who defied traditional interpretations, bringing a message of love, mercy, and understanding. His humane and compassionate approach contrasted sharply with the rigidity of the scribes and Pharisees. Tension between Jesus and the religious leaders was inevitable. While the Pharisees and scribes clung to the letter of the law, Jesus sought to reveal its true purpose. Biblical stories from this period show how he confronted hypocrisy and promoted a deeper, more compassionate understanding of the law. This dynamic between tradition and renewal is a valuable lesson that resonates to this day, reminding us of the importance of seeking the spirit of justice and mercy in our everyday actions. The Feast of Tabernacles, also known as Sukkot, was one of the most important celebrations in the Jewish religious calendar. This festival, deeply rooted in biblical stories, recalled the Israelites' pilgrimage through the desert after their liberation from Egypt. For 7 days, the Jews built, temporary huts made from tree branches, symbolizing the people's dependence on God during their journey. It was a period of reflection, gratitude, and adoration, where historical memory met living faith. The worship ceremonies and sacrifices performed in the Jerusalem temple during the festival were moments of intense devotion and communion. The Bible describes these practices as essential for maintaining Jewish faith and identity. The tabernacle, a mobile structure used by the Israelites, symbolized the presence of God among His people. Through biblical stories, we understand that each ritual and sacrifice carried a deep meaning, pointing to the need for an intimate relationship with the divine. The prophetic significance of the Feast of Tabernacles is also noteworthy. In addition to celebrating divine protection in the desert, the festival pointed to a future restoration of Israel and the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth. These prophecies, present in the scriptures, fueled the hope of a messianic liberator. Thus, the celebration was not only a remembrance of the past, but also an anticipation of the future promised in the biblical stories, renewing the people's faith and hope. In the midst of this festive and meaningful atmosphere, the Pharisees and scribes prepared a trap for Jesus. They knew that the celebration of tabernacles, with its large influx of worshipers and its religious importance, would be the perfect setting to test their authority and compassion. And so, in the crowded square of Jerusalem, the adulterous woman was brought before Jesus, setting into motion one of the most powerful and transformative narratives in biblical teachings. The Pharisees and scribes, always attentive to Jesus' every move, decided to set a clever trap to discredit him. They knew that Jesus was known for his compassion and for interpreting the law in a more humane and merciful way, which often conflicted with the rigidity of Jewish tradition. They saw the adulterous woman's situation as a perfect opportunity to test her words against biblical teachings and undermine her authority before the people. Taking the adulterous woman to Jesus during the Feast of Tabernacles, an event of great religious importance, was a strategic move. The crowd was gathered, and the tension in the air was palpable. The religious leaders expected that whatever Jesus responded, he would find himself in a delicate position. If he condemned women according to the law of Moses, it would appear insensitive and contradictory to his own teachings of love and forgiveness. If he acquitted her, they could accuse him of disrespecting divine law. The strict interpretation of the law by the Pharisees and scribes was more a demonstration of power than of true devotion. They were more interested in maintaining their status and control over the people than in seeking a compassionate understanding of biblical teachings. The trap they set for Jesus was an attempt to use the law itself against him, hoping that any response he gave could be used to weaken his influence and undermine his message of mercy. The Pharisees' plan reveals not only their political cunning, but also a profound lack of understanding of Jesus' teachings. They underestimated the wisdom and compassion he demonstrated in all the biblical stories. Instead of falling into the trap, Jesus transformed the situation, using it as a powerful lesson in forgiveness and introspection. This confrontation not only exposed the hypocrisy of the accusers, but also highlighted the true essence of divine law, which is permeated by love and compassion. In the first century, women's lives were marked by a series of challenges and severe restrictions. They were often seen as the property of men, without autonomy over their own lives and decisions. Biblical stories reveal to us that, in Jewish society at that time, women faced profound marginalization and an unequal application of justice. Cultural and religious norms reinforced a patriarchal system that placed disproportionate weight on them. The consequences of adultery, for example, were particularly severe for women. While men often escaped severe punishment, adulterous women were exposed to public humiliation and the possibility of stoning. The Bible shows us that female infidelity was considered a serious violation of the social and family order, resulting in punishments that went beyond physical punishment, including social ostracism. This context of extreme inequality reflected the rigidity of cultural and social norms at the time. In addition to physical punishments, women accused of adultery faced ongoing stigmatization and marginalization. Even after completing their punishments, many were relegated to the margins of society, living under the weight of a permanent sentence. Biblical stories from this era help us understand how these women were doubly victims of moral transgression and the harshness of human judgment. The lack of equity in the treatment of men and women reflected a profound injustice that Jesus came to challenge. Jesus, in contrast, brought a new perspective by treating women with dignity and compassion. Their interactions, recorded in the Bible, demonstrated a rare respect and inclusion for that time. He not only challenged cultural norms, but also revealed the true essence of divine law, justice permeated by love and mercy. By forgiving the adulterous woman, he not only saved her life, but also offered new hope, an invitation to personal transformation and spiritual renewal. Jesus, with a serenity that calmed even the most hardened hearts, bent down and began to write on the ground. This seemingly simple gesture carried a deep meaning. The crowd, initially eager for a quick and decisive response, was forced to wait and watch. Biblical stories are full of moments like this, where silence and reflection bring more wisdom than immediate words. What Jesus wrote on the ground remains a mystery, but the emotional and symbolic impact of his action is undeniable. As Jesus wrote on the ground, the tension in the air was palpable. His action diverted attention from the adulterous woman and placed the accusers in a position of introspection. They, who expected a quick conviction, were faced with a gesture that required reflection and self-evaluation. Bible stories often show us that Jesus used unexpected methods to teach profound lessons. This moment was no different, inviting everyone to consider their own sins before judging others. The mystery of what Jesus wrote on the ground has generated much speculation over the centuries. Some theologians suggest that he could be writing down the sins of the accusers, confronting them with their own failings. Others believe he was referencing Scripture, highlighting the need for a more compassionate interpretation of the law. Regardless of the content, Jesus' gesture resonated deeply, reminding us of biblical lessons about the need to look within ourselves. This gesture by Jesus, which initially seemed like a simple distraction, became a turning point in the narrative. By bending down and writing on the floor, he created a space for reflection and mercy. Biblical stories teach us that true justice goes beyond the literal application of the law. It is permeated by love, understanding, and compassion. Jesus' response to the situation was a powerful reminder that we should always seek the essence of divine justice in our everyday actions. In that tense moment, Jesus stood up and addressed the accusers with disarming serenity. With a firm and compassionate voice, he spoke the words that would echo through the centuries, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." These words cut through the air like a sharp blade, penetrating deeply into the consciousnesses of those present. Biblical stories repeatedly show how Jesus, with his divine wisdom, confronted hypocrisy and provoked sincere reflection. The accusers, who had previously felt secure in their moral superiority, were suddenly confronted with the reality of their own imperfections. The Bible reminds us that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So one by one, they began to abandon their stones and walk away, leaving the woman alone with Jesus. This moment of forced introspection is a powerful illustration of the impact of Jesus' words, inviting everyone to look within themselves before judging others. The impact of Jesus' words on the crowd was profound. The agitation and expectation gave way to silence and reflection. The woman, who minutes before was on the verge of being stoned, now found herself in a state of unexpected grace. Biblical stories often highlight how Jesus used the most desperate situations to reveal the depths of divine love and mercy. The crowd, witness to this act of compassion, was reminded of human frailty and the need for forgiveness. This episode not only saved the woman's life, but also offered a lasting lesson about the nature of judgment and mercy. Jesus, in exposing the hypocrisy of religious leaders, taught that true justice is not found in relentless condemnation, but in compassion and understanding. Biblical stories invite us to reflect on our own attitudes and to seek divine justice, which is always tempered by love and mercy. Thus, Jesus' message continues to resonate, challenging us to live according to these principles. With the square now silent and the accusers moving away, Jesus turned his attention to the woman, who was still shaking with fear and shame. In a show of love and compassion, he looked into her eyes and said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." These words, full of mercy, echoed in the minds and hearts of everyone present. Biblical stories often show us that Jesus preferred redemption to punishment, always seeking to restore and renew. Jesus' statement was an invitation for the woman to begin a new life, free from the shadow of her past. He not only saved her from imminent death, but also offered her a second chance. In the biblical stories, we see again and again that Jesus saw the potential for transformation in every person, regardless of their past mistakes. He looked beyond sin, focusing on the capacity for change and spiritual growth. This message of love and compassion resonated deeply with viewers. They witnessed firsthand the practical application of Jesus' biblical teachings on forgiveness. In today's world, we can apply this lesson to our own lives, offering mercy instead of judgment, seeking to understand instead of condemning. Small gestures of forgiveness can have profound impacts, transforming relationships and hearts. Jesus, by forgiving the adulterous woman, demonstrated that true strength lies in the ability to love and forgive. He taught us that mercy is an essential component of divine justice. Biblical stories invite us to reflect on how we can incorporate these principles into our daily lives. Whether at work, family, or friendships, forgiveness can pave the way for reconciliation and inner peace, promoting a more loving and compassionate community. With the square now silent and the accusers moving away, Jesus turned his attention to the woman, who was still shaking with fear and shame. In a show of love and compassion, he looked into her eyes and said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." These words, full of mercy, echoed in the minds and hearts of everyone present. Biblical stories often show us that Jesus preferred redemption to punishment, always seeking to restore and renew. Jesus' statement was an invitation for the woman to begin a new life, free from the shadow of her past. He not only saved her from imminent death, but also offered her a second chance. In the biblical stories, we see again and again that Jesus saw the potential for transformation in every person, regardless of their past mistakes. He looked beyond sin, focusing on the capacity for change and spiritual growth. This message of love and compassion resonated deeply with viewers. They witnessed firsthand the practical application of Jesus' biblical teachings on forgiveness. In today's world, we can apply this lesson to our own lives, offering mercy instead of judgment, seeking to understand instead of condemning. Small gestures of forgiveness can have profound impacts, transforming relationships and hearts. Jesus, by forgiving the adulterous woman, demonstrated that true strength lies in the ability to love and forgive. He taught us that mercy is an essential component of divine justice. Biblical stories invite us to reflect on how we can incorporate these principles into our daily lives. Whether at work, family, or friendships, forgiveness can pave the way for reconciliation and inner peace, promoting a more loving and compassionate community. Jesus, through his actions and words, taught us that true justice is permeated by mercy and forgiveness. He challenged the rigid and often hypocritical norms of the time, showing that the literal application of the law does not always reflect the heart of God. Biblical stories are full of examples where Jesus seeks not only external conformity to the law, but an internal transformation of the heart. His approach invites us to reconsider our own attitudes and practices, seeking justice that is both fair and compassionate. Jesus' message was clear. Divine justice transcends the mere observance of rules and is deeply rooted in love and compassion. Biblical narratives illustrate how he often confronted those who rigidly adhered to the letter of the law while neglecting its spirit. This call to introspection and empathy challenges us to evaluate whether our actions truly reflect biblical teachings or if we are stuck in a legalistic and superficial interpretation of the faith. Reflecting on divine law in light of Jesus' teachings requires humility and self-awareness. We must ask ourselves whether we are applying the law in a way that promotes reconciliation and healing, or if we are perpetuating cycles of judgment and exclusion. Biblical narratives remind us that true justice is inseparable from love. When we practice mercy in our daily interactions, we are not only fulfilling the law, but also living biblical teachings fully and authentically. If you're interested in having a Bible like the one we use in our studies, check out the link in the first pinned comment. If you enjoy our content and can support our channel, consider buying us a coffee through Buy Me a Coffee. Additionally, if you can purchase a crucifix, we also have a link in the first pinned comment. We greatly appreciate your support. God bless and see you in the next video.